So welcome. Thank you very much for coming along today. My name is Doug Oldfield. I'm one of the directors at the Ferryfield Group. And today, what we're going to be really talking about is some kind of, I guess, some ideas to help get more out of Safran Risk. So I'll explain why we've got the session set up and why I'm delivering this and so on in a moment. But just before I do that, I'm going to just click this little button down here to get this started. As anyone who maybe sort of post on LinkedIn might know, my ability to stick to a schedule when it comes to these sorts of sessions is not always good. So I've got a little timer going on in that bottom right-hand corner, which I can occasionally glance at to see how much time I've got left. Because I think we're going to get through 10 tips and tricks, which I think is potentially a tad optimistic, but we'll see how we get on. But the session is being recorded. So if anyone needs to jump out kind of before the end or whatever, we will send around the recording afterwards. Just to I'll give a very, very short introduction about myself and Ferryfield and why we're here, and then we're gonna crack on with everything. Essentially, Ferryfield is a company that was set up to provide some kind of specialised services, mainly in the field of quantitative risk analysis. So we do training, we do consulting, and we also do software sales as well on behalf of Safran and others as well. But kind of the main focus for today is very much about Safran. So we've got a team of people that we work with, myself and others, who are kind of working on training and consulting engagements to really help people get the most out of Safran and QRA and to make sure that they understand how the models work, how the software works, and really trying to make sure that when you transition across to a new piece of software, that it's a smoother process as possible when you're kind of maximising your return on investment. And so we've actually been working now with Safran for more than 4 years, 4.5 years, something like that. And so we're a platinum partner. We're kind of very, very, very closely linked with them. We do lots of training and consulting on their behalf. But then, as I said, we also act as a distribution and a reseller of their software as well. And so I guess, with these sorts of sessions, we've got a dual role really. Where on the one hand, we're really kind of showcasing how good Safran is and all the different things that it can do. But also hopefully giving you some confidence that Ferryfield are a group who really know what we're talking about when it comes to QRA. And so if ever you've got any training requirements for staff about Safran, or if you have any consulting or model auditing or assurance, that type of thing, we're very, very happy to kind of assist with that as well. So please do get in touch and let us know if that would be useful. So, we've worked with lots and lots and lots of organisations worldwide in all sorts of different industries and geographies and so on. So we've got myself, I've been working in QRA for the past 17 years, and pretty much everyone we work with has got a very long history of working in this particular field. Talking about risks, I can just hear that my 3 children are just walking back into the house, my wife and dog. So I'm going to give a preemptive apology just in case there are any interruptions come our way. Hopefully not, but I've been doing this long enough to realise that there's probably a fairly high risk of that happening. But we'll see. Because I always forget at the end, because I'm so excited to talk about the software and so on. If anybody has got any questions that don't get covered during the course, or the webinar rather, or if anybody wants to reach out to discuss anything, my contact details on the screen at the moment. You can email me, you can get me via LinkedIn. And yeah, please do give us a shout if there's anything at all that we can help you with that comes off the back of this course. All right, so what I'm going to do, let me close that down and let me load up Safran. Okay, so I've got a list of 10 things written down on a bit of paper, and the intention is to get through all 10 of these things. And some of these things are I think, quite kind of niche things that maybe aren't going to be of interest to absolutely everybody, but hopefully there's going to be a little bit of something for everybody, and that anyone who's on this call will go away having learned at least a few extra things that they didn't know about. That's very much the objective, and fingers crossed we'll get through all 10. So I guess the first thing that I'm going to do then is I'm going to load up an example file. And actually I'm kind of cheating a little bit because this is also going to be the first tip that I've got. And so I'm going to open up an example that I want to use. And anyone who's been working in Safran for a while know that this is maybe where you can open your projects from. And depending on how long you've been using the tool for, how many different versions and models you get, this can actually look quite unmanageable after a while. And so what I'm actually going to show first of all is the use of something called the enterprise fields within Safran, which is a way of being able to kind of like structure and tag and characterize different models so we can slice and dice them in different ways. So rather than having to scroll through like a whole load of different things to find a particular project, I'm going to be using these things called the project selector. And what that allows me to do is to basically go and kind of sub or categorize my different models and schedules and projects into different categories. So I've got some client models, I've got some demo models, and if I want to as well, I can even kind of add extra kind of categorizations in as well. So I've got my demo models, but then these are further subdivided into live and archived versions and so on. Now, the kind of the benefits of this are really useful if you're working, as I said, in an environment where you've got lots and lots of schedules and projects in your database. But of course, you could also use this on a network basis as well. So Safran you can install either locally on your machine or local database on your machine, or it can point towards a shared SQL Server network server environment. And so lots of organizations, they might have different business lines. If you're working in oil and gas, you might have your onshore and offshore projects, downstream with JVs, whatever it might be. If you're a consulting company, you might have projects in rail, in mining, in infrastructure, and all sorts of other things. And so the idea of these enterprise fields is that they allow us to structure our database in a way that hopefully makes it easier to find models and so on. So it could also be that you have an archiving process whereby you have a current version that you're working on, but then you also make sure that you're keeping previous iterations of your schedule in a database, but you don't necessarily want to see them all at any one time. And so being able to just use this as a filter is something which is it seems quite simple. Most people don't realize about this, and it's a very useful thing to be able to do. So I'm going to show you how this gets set up. So first of all, let me actually load up one of these models here. So I think I want this one here first. Let me just double check the number. Yep, that'll do. So I'm going to open up my project, and I'm going to show you whereabouts these categorizations appear, and then how we can then apply them. And incidentally, you don't need the project to be open in order to do this. You could just go back to the to that open project screen or whatever it's called, and right click, and then you go to project properties, and you can set it up from there. So you don't have to go back and reopen every project to do it. You can just categorize them all from that particular screen. But if I go to this particular project here and go to properties, this is the various metadata about the project that got created by Safran when I imported it. And you can see that there's a tab here that says enterprise fields. And so in these enterprise fields, we've got these two different things that I've set up. So I've got my project categorization. So is it a client model that I'm working on for consulting or training purposes? Or is it a demonstration model, which is what I'm going to be using today? And then I've got a second one, which is it a live schedule or is it an archived version? Now, of course, these are just examples. You can have any other versions of these that you want to. But the place in which we set them up is in this admin tab up here. Now, the admin tab, it's one of those kind of like it's a tab which lots of people don't necessarily use or go to very much within Safran, but depending on whether you're using this on a network server basis or a local database basis, which is what I'm doing here, it's going to depend on whether you've got the access to do this or the read-write access to do this. So we're going to assume that in order to set this up, you've got access. If it's something that you haven't got access to, you want to have a discussion about it, ping me a message. We can talk about that offline. But for now, we're just going to assume that you've got access to this particular tab and are able to set this up. So if you just click on Enterprise Fields, this is where we can see exactly what categorizations and codes and subcategories and so on that we want to use. So, for example, up at the top, you can see that I've got these project categorization, which was whether they're client or demo models, and then schedule versions, whether they're live or archive. So if I wanted to set up a new one, all I would do, I would just go to new field. I would choose what type of field it is. I just use these reference ones. You could potentially set up something different, a different type of field, but I'm just going to use a reference one, and I'm going to call this number 3, and I'm going to call this one. So what you'll see is that it kind of auto fills with the name, but I'm just going to call this, I don't know, webinar example. Oops. Okay, so that's the name of the kind of the field type, and then down below, this is then where I would set up the next level down, the ones that I want to belong to this category. So I'm just going to click new item, and I'm going to call this one, I don't know, example one, example here one, and then I'm going to set up another one, which is, let's do the same thing, ex2, and then I don't know, example here two. And then click on OK. And so now, if I then go back into my project metadata, which again, I can find under the project tab, under the schedule, and I can then click on properties. And then if I go back into that enterprise fields tab, you'll see now that we've got this additional thing that we've just set up, and I can now tag it with whatever I want to. If I click on OK, then obviously if I then close back down my project and then go back to this open project area here, you'll see now we've got this additional thing that we can do. And because you can sort by you can do the kind of like you choose your top level, and then you choose your second level and third level and so on. It might be the case that actually what I'm going to do is sort by my webinar example, and then my project categorizations, and then my schedule example instead. And obviously this tree structure here then reorders. So it's just something which is really, really, really useful. And again, something that lots of people don't really know about. So hopefully that's a useful thing to be able to see. And obviously now, and of course you can also just drag these things around and put them in the right order and so on that you need for them. Okay, so that was number one. So let me load back up my model again now. Now option number two. So some of these tips are kind of fairly generic tips about how to do things in Safran Risk that you might not already know. And there's going to be some which are kind of, I guess, really about trying to figure out what's important within a schedule. So I've imported this example schedule in. It's a client schedule, which is why I've just put lorem ipsum for the description, so it's nice and confidential. And what we'll see in here is that actually in this particular schedule, I've got a whole load of schedule warnings, which I'm going to need to work through. And this is something which is quite painful to do. And so what we can normally recommend is that we want to focus on the areas where we've got the biggest bang for our buck. You know, we want to focus on the things that are the most important. Because if we spend all of our time working on things which don't really have a particularly significant impact, then that can be something which is you know, it just takes a long time on the project, particularly if you've got an activity, a schedule with 10, 20,000 activities, a whole load of warnings. Knowing where to start is obviously something which is quite difficult. So one thing that I would recommend doing first of all is doing a stress test. And so I'm going to try and get two things into two tips into one. And for me at least, the idea of a stress test is something which I can throw at a model, and I can vary the contents, put them under stress in order to see what the outcome is. And the reason I'm going to do that is I want to find out what my most important activities are within my schedule. And so Safran has got all these different tabs along the top. Now, by default, when Safran is first installed, there are some really useful tabs that have been turned off. And so what I want to talk about very briefly is the idea of is how we can turn those back on again, and then explain why they might be useful. So if I go to the Home tab here, when I click on my options cog in the middle, I get a list of the different tabs which are available and then which tabs are visible. And you can see that this one here is turned off, this global risks one. And I think by default, both the global risks and the risk calendars are turned off when you first install Safran. So unless someone's told you to go and turn these on, it may well be that you've never ever seen these before. So I'm going to turn those on and click OK, and then you'll see that those now appear up in my my toolbar, whatever it's called, up at the top of the screen. And we have this global risks area. Now, the idea of the global risks area within Safran is that what it allows us to do is to set up a lessons learned library, a repository of different risks, estimating uncertainties, even controls and so on, that we might want to reuse in our new projects. And this could be set up either on a network basis, so everyone in the organization can share the same global risks, or you can do it on a local basis, which is what I've got here. But essentially what I've got is a whole list of different kind of like standardizations and things that I might want to think about when I import a schedule for a new project. So it might be that I've got some various estimating uncertainties that I want to standardize on, almost like a little bit like the quick risk or templated quick risk in PRA. So I've set up some of these with these kind of various estimate uncertainties that I might want to apply to activities in my schedule. I've also got some various risks and down below, and obviously these risks could be either cost or schedule, or they could be pre or post mitigated. And one of the nice things about this global risks is that because we can populate all of the regular information from Safran that we might want to capture for our project risks in here, we could also use it as a controls library. So we could have some recommended controls that we want our new planners or risk managers to use on a new project, and they could be set out and laid out in the in this global risks area here. So I guess point number one is make sure it's unhidden or it's checked so you can see the box. And then this is a really, really useful way of building up a store of information to reutilize either on an individual basis or across the organization. And you can either click on new global risk and add them here. You've also got the ability to import and export via Excel or XML if you want to start sharing it around with other people. Now, what I've got then, I've got this stress test that I've set up. And so what I want to do with this is I don't know anything about this schedule. I don't know which activities are important, which ones aren't. And so for me, a good way of being able to get a first pass on this is to run a stress test. And so in my global risks, I've got a stress test set up. Excuse me. And this is one where I want to take whatever's in my baseline schedule. I want to vary the durations by, in this case, plus or minus 20%, in order to see which of them are kind of having the biggest impact, or which of them maybe fall on the critical path most of the time. Now, I've set this up as a relative impact. We could do it as an absolute, whereby I might do kind of minus 20 days, plus 20 days, or something along those lines. But the only danger with doing that is that then, unless you set up some kind of a filter, you would then maybe be applying that to milestones, which maybe shouldn't be kind of like plus or minus 20 days, maybe. And so if you do it with relative ones, then you're not going to catch the milestones as well in there. But anyway, so I've got my stress test here. And so because it's in my global risks, I can go to my project risk tab here. I can click on the little drop down selector. I then choose that stress test one. And now that's been brought from my global risks area into my project risk area. So what I'm going to do, I'm now going to go to my risk mapping tab. Good. All right, good. So we are good to go. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to just sort by this group view here very quickly. And then by doing that, it means that I can then just click. Then I can go to the very top level up here, and then I can just click, and then that stress test that I've just talked about has now been applied to these 5,247 activities that are contained within my schedule. So, of course, now what I can do, I can go and run a simulation, and each of those 5,427, or whatever the number was, of iteration of activities in my model are now getting changed by plus or minus 20% in order to give me some idea as to the which activities fall on the critical path the most. And we'll come back and talk about that in a moment. But one thing that's something which is really is a kind of like a little interesting detour sidebar here, which is that when we build up these risk models, it's very easy to kind of make some assumptions about how they work and the way that the schedule is constructed and everything else. And one of the things that I personally find quite interesting is that when we apply like a stress test like this, essentially what I've done here is I've applied a symmetrical distribution whereby it could be 20% less, it could be 20% more, and my most likely is right in the middle of that. And so when you then come to look at the results, what would be a natural assumption would be to assume that my outputs are also going to be in a similar way, that some are going to finish before my original completion date, and some are going to finish afterwards. And that holds true for some models, but the more non-finish to start relationships you've got in your model, specifically finish to finish ones, it can actually result in some kind of a skew. And so if I go back into my distribution graph here, what you can see is that my deterministic completion date was the 30th of April. And so if it was symmetrical, you would expect there to be half my samples finishing before that date, half of them finishing after that date. But actually, what you can see here is that I've got zero probability of that. And so as soon as I've chucked in this distribution onto this, which is symmetrical, what you can see is that actually at my P80, there's an extra 45 days. There's a month or a month and a half that's been added on as a result of the way the model has been built. Now, there's a guy called Santosh Bhatt who does lots of stuff with Safran as well, based in Australia. He's written some stuff around merge bias analysis, very worth having a look at and searching out. But essentially, I think most of this variability is because there's lots of finish to finish links in the model, and that can have an impact. Can kind of the effects of it can be to drag stuff across to the right hand side when you're doing an exercise like this. So it's an interesting thing to be aware of, and we'll come back and we'll try and figure out, well, what's a good way of trying to counteract that, or at least identify what is it that's causing the biggest impact on our behavior. So we will talk about that in a short while. But I think it's an interesting little thing to be aware of. But of course, one of the exercises, or one of the reasons that we might want to do that exercise and that stress test in the first place, is then we could do something like setting up a filter. And so in here, I've got a filter set up, which is now meaning that the only activities that I'm seeing on the screen, instead of seeing 5,427 activities, of course, that little stopwatch has covered the number, I'm only seeing 117. And those 117 activities are the ones where I've built up a filter in Safran. And condition number one is that they need that my risk critical index, which is the column in Safran that tracks how often activities are on the critical path, is greater than 0. Condition number 2 is that it's less than 100. So basically, these activities fall on the critical path some of the time, but not all the time. And then I've also got another one here, which is this activity type equals activity, to get rid of any kind of milestones or hammocks or anything like that that might somehow creep into here, although they really shouldn't. But essentially, what that stress test has just done, it's given me a starting point. It's given me something to go on. It's given me 117 activities to start to look at, rather than 5,500. And certainly, when you're doing this type of thing, you need to start somewhere, and this is a really good way of being able to tease out what's important. And then, as an extension of that, those are the sorts of things that you might want to then go and start including in your risk workshop. Because, of course, when we set up a filter in Safran, excuse me again, that filter is then applied to things like my risk mapping tab here. And so then I could go and sit down with my engineers or project managers or whoever it might be, and then just do the risk workshop. Rather than on absolutely everything, I'm just going to be starting off on the things that are captured within this filter. Okay, so that's by my reckoning 3. Although maybe I've got four possible things in there already. But I'm now going to open up another version of that same model. But in this particular version of the model, I've also got some. We've now got to the point where we've done our risk workshop. We've mapped our risks across to various activities in the schedule. And now I want to kind of talk about a couple of other things. So first of all, although I've kind of ticked all these boxes myself, what you can see is that if we look at the schedule warnings, I've got 392 things where I've got some degree of lag on the activities in my schedule. And we often get told that kind of we want to avoid having lags in the schedule, and certainly that can be something which is particularly true where activities have fallen on the critical path. But equally, how do we know where to start with this? Which ones do we want to look at? Do we want to invest a whole day or a few days working our way through this or not? And so what we're going to do now is I'm going to do a little bit of scenario testing, which is a really good way of teasing out, do we want to invest more time and effort into these things or not? And so what I want to do, I want to see, or the hypothesis that I want to test is, I don't, these lags are important. I need to do something about this, and I want to do some testing to see if that's a valid hypothesis or not, that these lags are important in some way. And so there's a really interesting way of doing this, which I only found out myself quite recently when I needed to do it on a consulting gig. And what we've got this ability here to look at the assign link fields. Now, so this is something we can do to it's almost like a global change type thing. And what I'm going to do, you can see various properties that are here on this link field thing. So what type of link it is, what calendar it is, and so on. So we can use this for making wholesale changes. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to my links filter, and I'm going to add one in here. And I'm not interested in what type of link it is, but for me, I want to look for any activity where my lags are greater than 0. Okay, and so I'm going to click on OK, and now what Safran has now just returned is all of the activities that have some kind of lag between them and their succeeding activity. Now, what we do here is I'm going to do a little save as, and so we're going to call this one save as. We'll call this one risks. And we'll call this one, just trying to think which way around this is going to be. This is going to be schedule risks, no. Okay, so we've now got 2 different versions of this model, and one of them is the I guess the baseline one, and the next one is the one where we're going to take out the lags. And in order to test this hypothesis out, what we're going to do, we're going to set up a comparison in our distribution comparison area here, and we're going to go and set up a new report. We're going to add a report in, and we're going to call this one, I don't know, lag tester or something like that. Lag tester. I'm just going to copy and paste that description there again. It doesn't need to be too detailed in this particular case. But the first thing I want to do is essentially establish some kind of a baseline. So I'm going to run the analysis. I'm going to generate my 5,000 values. That seems a bit high, actually, considering it's just a little example. Let's change that to 1,000. Obviously, there's 5,427 activities. So running 5,000 iterations, it's fairly, takes a little bit longer. Whereas it's much easier for me to talk through 1,000 iterations, which is what I've just done, and to generate some results. So this is what my project looks like. And maybe let's look at our P80 as the 7th of August. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to click export. And I'm not. I'm going to click send to comparison, and then what I've got here, if we look at the P80, this is my lags model here. Okay, so I've got some data which is allowing me to see what is the impact of those lags in my model. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to my schedule tab over here. I'm going to go back to that assign link fields. I'm going to go to link filter. I'm going to click add. I'm going to change that to lag. I'm going to say it's greater than 0. And then I'm going to click on OK. And now what I can do, so in this column here for lag, I'm going to put the value 0. I'm going to click fill down. And then I'm going to click execute. And Safran is saying, do you want to do this with, oops, I'm going to, let me see, can I take that value out there? Okay, so all I want to do is just make sure that when I fill that down, yeah, I click execute, and then Safran is then going to update whichever link records are in here. I'm going to click on OK. Safran's now going to process that. The reason I looked a bit confused, if I look confused or worried, then I was worried that it was also going to make any changes here to this, changing everything to a finish to start, but it didn't. It's just made the changes that I use for lag. So now I've got the same model. but I've got no lag on any of the activities. And so I'm going to go to the Analyze tab here. I'm going to click Run Analysis. I'm going to generate some more random values. And then we're going to look at the distribution graph here. Now, I guess at this point, what we're doing is we're trying to figure out, is this something that we need to be concerned about or not? Do we want to go and invest a whole lot of time trying to, understand what these lags are? Should they be replaced by activity? Should they be added as duration uncertainty? What do we want to do with these? So this is now my second set of results. I'm going to send this to the comparison chart, and so what we can now see is, if we're interested in the P80, which was the arbitrary value that I chose, what we can see is that across the course of this project, the difference between having all of those lags for all 392 activities versus having no lags at all is a difference of 2 days. Now, if my project was 4 days long, I might think that's maybe something worth looking at, but you're very unlikely to do an analysis of QRA on a 4-day project. This is a project that's over the next kind of two years or whatever it is. And so for me, at least, I would be comfortable saying I did some testing. We looked at the lags. We ascertained that the presence of the lags wasn't going to have any material impact on our results, and so we've just left them as they are. So this kind of idea of being able to do scenario testing is something which is really, really, really useful and powerful in Safran Risk. And whether we're looking to compare the impact of having correlations, the impact of opportunities, being able to send things to this comparison chart and just testing out our hypotheses or assumptions is a really good way of figuring it out. So again, it's about trying to work sensibly. It's about trying to give us little mouthfuls of stuff that we can work our way through, rather than a whole plate of all sorts of warnings to deal with in one go. Okay, so that was item number 4 on my list, I think. So what else might we want to do with this? Well, as I said, sometimes when we've kind of got loads of schedule warnings, we're trying to figure out, what's important. As I mentioned before, setting up the filters can be a really good way of doing things. And so I've got a filter set up which allows me to find any activity that might fall on the critical path during a simulation. But actually, maybe what I also want to do, if we bear in mind that idea of the asymmetrical results that is most likely caused by my finish-to-finish links, it might not be practical to get my my planner to go and remove all of those, or to change them all to finish the start links, or whatever it is. But there might be some easy wins that we can pick up. And so what I'm going to do, you can see in this particular layout I've got a couple of options set up. I've got my predecessors and successors. And something that I again found out only reasonably recently is that if I right click on the column header here, so this number of predecessors and number of successors, they're obviously columns, they're bits of data within Safran. But if I go to properties, what you can see is that there's this little field down here, which you've probably seen a few times before and never kind of looked at it in much detail. But what you've got is the ability to choose what type of information you want to see represented in the cell. And so when we're talking about predecessors and successors, it's quite reasonable to talk about things like, is there a lag? Is there, what's the ID? But if, for example, I change it to ID type and lag and then apply an OK, then what you can see is that in these cells here, we get the activity ID. We also then get the link type, in this case, finish to start, or FS, and then we also get to see the lag, which I'm very pleased to see is it's just a whole bunch of zeros, because that's what I updated absolutely everything to in my schedule. But now what I've got, I've got my 116 activities, or whatever it is, that sometimes fall on the critical path. And in these cells here, I can then also see what link types there are. And so what I've done if I look at this next little filter that I've set up, what you can see is that I've adapted the filter to enable me to search on the activities which contain a finish-to-finish link. And so just to kind of talk you through this logic here. So first of all, I'm looking for anything that falls on the critical path at least once during my 1000 iterations. So risk critical index is greater than 0. Then the next bit of the logic, so we've got the kind of the and or for the Boolean type logic. So and I'm looking for either predecessors, which is the data in here, which contain an FF, or it's not the easiest thing to say with a slight lisp, or successors, which also contain an FF. So kind of either or, it doesn't have to be both of them. And the idea here is that when the activity type is equal to an activity. So if I click on apply and OK, did I actually do that correctly? So each of these 57 activities are activities that fall on the critical path, some of the time at least, and then either they have a predecessor or a successor activity that has got a finish to finish link in it. And so maybe those are something that I might want to go and explore with the planner if I'm worried about things like merge bias analysis or something like that. So it's just kind of like sometimes with Safran, you almost kind of have to figure out what you might want to do and then try and figure out the way to do it. And this is just a little detour into probably the way that my mind works for you. So all right, so let's now take that filter off. And now I've got all the activities in my schedule. And so what I wanted to show next was how we can then use the filters, those filters that we've just set up, to then easily highlight things in our schedule. So so what I'm going to do, I'm going to right click over here. I'm going to go to fonts down at the bottom. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to click add. And essentially I want to take that information that I've just found in my by using the filter, and I want to highlight them in the schedule, so it's nice and easy when I'm sitting down with a planner or a project manager to kind of scroll through and see exactly where those things are. It could be activities with no predecessors, it could be activities where the critical path split, it could be anything at all, but I just want to kind of use a filter in order to highlight something on my schedule. And so I'm going to call this one here, I don't know, FF CP. Finish to finish link and on the critical path. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to change the background of those, any cell which meets that condition, to this lilac, I guess. And at this point here, you'll see that we can now choose exactly how that gets applied, or where that gets applied rather. And so if I click this little 3 ellipses button over here, what I can then do, I can then go and choose my filter. So in this case, my sometimes and always critical path, which was that one there, and click on OK. And then if I click apply and then OK, and then if I start scrolling through my schedule, there's lots of finished activities here. So let's scroll down a bit further. There we go. What you'll then start to see is things that are highlighted in purple, which are things where the critical path is greater than 0, and then where somewhere in either my predecessors or my successors, I have got an FF shown on there. Okay, so that's a little bit of kind of filtered and conditional formatting. So I'm going to close down this project here, and I'm going to open up my next example for you. And so I'm going to, in fact, I might as well use these enterprise groups that I set up earlier on. I'll go to my demo models. I'm going to load up this drone one model that I'm sure anyone who's ever been on a training course or attended one of these webinars will have seen at least a few times before. The next thing that I want to talk about then is the ability really to use our project risk tab here as a way of being able to validate that our models have got a complete set of data. And the reason for that is, we set up these risk registers. We might come up with pre and post mitigated, impacts for everything. And it's very easy to assume that we've done a really kind of thorough job of that. And what some organisations do, they maybe run 2 analyses. They do one with everything pre-mitigated, and then they click at the top and then run everything else post-mitigated. But when we create a new risk in Safran, the default is that in fact, if I click new project risk, we might have a schedule impact up at the top, but unless I actually go and build up a post-mitigated one, then I don't have that in place. And so sometimes it's possible to end up with gaps in our metadata, which we think we might have a pre and post mitigated or something similar, but we might have missed something. So what I would recommend doing is showing the columns that are available up here. So this kind of icon top right. If I go to columns, maybe what I'm going to do, I'm going to show schedule distribution and post-mitigated schedule distribution, and also mappings count, which is one that I use quite a lot. And so what that then allows me to do is it allows me, if I just kind of resize things a little bit, it allows me then to look for gaps. And so it might be the case that this is a really useful thing to make sure that we've got a complete set of data. Or maybe we're working where we've got cost and schedule in one place, and so we want to make sure that that if we've got cost and schedule risk impacts, that we don't accidentally miss something out. And so maybe we're going to look for any risks where we've got a schedule impact, but we haven't got some kind of a cost impact associated with it. So it's a really, really useful thing to kind of play around with these selectors. Mappings count is another one that I really like, because what that allows us to do, it allows us to sort and to find the risk or uncertainties which have been assigned to the largest number of activities. And often when we're trying to figure out what's gone wrong with our model and why our project is now finishing in the year 2150 rather than 2028, often looking for the activities that have been mapped towards a large number of risks that have been mapped against a large number of activities, typically with an impact independently unchecked, is a good place to start. Okay, so that was the column selectors, and actually let's just unclutter my screen a little bit here, because there's far too many things in view for my liking. Okay, so that looks slightly better. Let's take off my post schedule distribution. There we go. Looks a little bit cleaner again. So the next thing that I want to talk about then is something which I think if you've done a training course, most people have maybe saw on a training course, but may well have forgotten about. And I get asked about this so much that I think it's probably worth highlighting this, which is that how does Safran deal with opportunities? Because of course, what we have is we have a project risk tab, we have this standard risk type, but we don't have an opportunity type. And so when we're talking about opportunities in Safran, generally speaking, how we look to manage these is, or the kind of the fairly standard practice is that when we talk about opportunities, they're not things that happen by magic. They're things that happen as a result of some action that we take. And so if you want to set up an opportunity in Safran, generally speaking, we map the opportunity that we want to take to some particular activities. And so, for example, here, what we're looking to do, we're looking to figure out, is it worth us outsourcing some of our fabrication activities to a larger provider in order to save time and or money? And so what we've got these three activities down here, we've mapped it across to. And the pre-mitigated position is us essentially doing nothing. So we're going to do the work ourselves, and whatever was in the schedule originally for those activities, 20 days, 50 days, and 60 days, that's how long it's going to take us. But in the post-mitigated position here, what we can see is that what we've figured out is that maybe if we go and kind of inspect these other factories and negotiate some agreements, we think it might be able to save us some element of time. Now, generally speaking, there might be some kind of a cost associated with seeking these opportunities, and so it's a good idea to kind of put the cost or impact of those actions. We can list them in Safran. So I've got a $5,000 cost, which is which I've logged against some cost element in my cost breakdown structure, and that's the cost of me negotiating and signing new agreements. And the offsite visit and inspection of this third-party factory is going to add 5 days to a particular activity in my WBS. And when we run a simulation, when we choose post-mitigated in our column selector on the Analyze tab, or the risk select on the Analyze tab, it's going to cost me $5,000, and 5 days is going to get added to this particular activity here. But in doing so, we're hoping to save either some time or some money. And so in Safran, we can, whether we want to use a relative or absolute distribution, we can represent some kind of a saving. So if we were doing it with a relative distribution, we might use something like this, whereby our our baseline is 100%. So duration is going to take 100% of our time. If it's a 50-day duration, then 100% of 50 is 50 days. Whereas if it's 40%, then that would be 20 days. If it was 50%, it's going to be 25 days. And so by having a percentage less than 100%, that represents a saving from our baseline, saving of time in this case. Or if we wanted to use absolute values, we could use a negative value. And so we could do this for time as well. So it could be, minus 10 days, minus 5 days, minus 2 days, or whatever. But the example down here I've got is for cost, as some kind of a cost saving. So relative distributions, less than 100% is a saving. Absolute distributions using a negative value means that we're going to net that off the total cost or time or schedule effort. So what are we going to do? So let's kind of then show how we would then evidence this. So that, the idea here is we think we might be able to save some time and money, but how do we actually go and show whether that is the case or not? And so what we're going to do, we're going to run two versions of our simulation. So simulation number one, we're going to essentially put that at either pre-mitigated or turn it off entirely. It doesn't really matter. But what I'm doing here is I'm not doing that outsourcing fabrication, and so it's kind of my business as usual, if you like. This is, if I don't do anything, this is business as usual. I'm going to run the analysis, I'm going to generate some scenarios, I'm then going to go to my distribution comparison, and then I'm going to go to my reports. I'm going to add a new report, and this new report is going to be, we're going to call this op test. I'm then going to go and send this data to that comparison. And because I've got cost in this particular model as well, maybe I'm also going to send my cost results to that comparison as well. And obviously it'll be on a different tab because time and cost are different. So we're going to call this op equals no. Same over here, op equals no. Maybe we're going to look at our P90 as the point of comparison. And so then what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to my Analyze tab. I'm then going to turn that risk on, or opportunity on in this case, change that to post mitigated. I'm going to run my analysis and then going to generate some other results. So this is my cost one, and this is my schedule one. And so if we were comparing the schedule, what we can see is that, I forgot to say the name there, but the green one is one where that opportunity wasn't taken, which gives me a P90 completion date of the 2nd of September. The red one is the one where we outsource our fabrication, and the difference at the P90, the delta, is 26 days, and that's 26 days. It also includes the 5 days of going and inspecting the factory as well. So so we can kind of compare those things, and looking at the cost, we can see that there is actually some kind of a cost saving, maybe slightly less, but we're still kind of cost positive as a result of doing it, maybe because it's cheaper to outsource and buy the machinery ourselves or something like that. So that's kind of typically how we model opportunities in Safran. We use the same kind of standard project risk, but we rather than having a pre and post impact, all we have is a post impact, because the pre-mitigated is doing nothing, not managing or taking the opportunity. Now I've got 6 minutes left, so so I was hoping to get some Q&A done. It might be that if there are questions, maybe we'll if you type your questions in, and I think I'll concentrate on showing the last tip here, but any questions that get asked, we will send a response around to everybody afterwards, or we can always have a follow-up session or something like that. But the final thing that I wanted to do was just to talk about how we can mix cost and schedule in a way that I think is really, really useful and simple. And so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to load up an example schedule here, which has got nothing in it at all. All it's got is a schedule, and there's no risks. There is some schedule uncertainty that's been put in the P6 file, which I'm going to use to run a quick simulation. But essentially, it's a model test. Oops. So this is what happens. I write things like test project, and I end up with all sorts of things in my database, which is why those enterprise fields are going to be particularly useful for me in terms of categorizing my models. But essentially what I've got a schedule that's now being imported into Safran that's got no cost risks at all associated with it. So it's not a cost or resource loaded schedule. It's just very much a standalone schedule with nothing in it except for the activities themselves. Now, in Safran, we've got the ability to import and things via Excel. And so at the moment, I've got an empty project risk tab. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to import a cost risk register. Now, that cost risk register, it might have come from Excel. You might have been using something like at risk or model risk, and we're converting it into this format that Safran understands, which is the Safran Risk import template, which is what I've got set up here. So what I've got basically 10 risks where the only impact associated with them is some kind of a cost risk. So there's just a cost risk and absolutely nothing else. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back into Safran. I'm going to click import from Excel. I'm going to go and find that risk register. I'm going to click open, and then I'm going to say, ta-da! I've now got my cost risk register in Safran. Now I'm going to turn off my advanced impacts. That's probably a session for another webinar another day. But essentially, what I've got 10 cost risks, each with some kind of a cost risk impact. Now, what I really like about this is that sometimes we might just want to have our cost risk profile and come up with our P90 cost risk exposure or whatever. But also sometimes what can be quite nice is to be able to actually try and break down what our cost risk exposure is by phases of our project or activities or sub-projects or work packages or whatever it might be. And so what I've done, I've just assigned those 10 cost risks to different phases within my project. Now, I don't have to do it like this. I could just run a standalone cost risk analysis. But what I've done, I've just assigned those costs to some various phases in my project. And of course, because it's just parent-child thing, it means that each of the individual activities have got the costs assigned as well. But again, it's just a little illustration. So I'm going to go to my Analyze tab. I'm going to click Include Schedule Uncertainty and Run Analysis. And I've got some uncertainty around my project completion date here. But if I go to the Cost tab down below, what you'll see is that I now have a cost risk profile that's just been generated as well. And obviously what I could do, I could go and drill down and see how much I'm spending on the different phases. But essentially I've got a P90 value here of 9.283 million. And so this is my standalone cost risk analysis. But if I was to go and have a look at something like my probabilistic cash flow over here, then what I could maybe see is how much, or rather when I'm spending money, or when my cost risk exposure is falling across the time horizon of my project. So actually just do it on years instead. Okay, so year number 1, year number 2, year number 3. And so what this is showing me is it's showing me not just my overall kind of cost risk profile, but it's showing me my periodic values as well. So for example, if I was interested in my P80, then in year number 1, it's the top of that orange bar there, it's 1386. In year number 2, it's whatever it is, 3.5 million. In year number 4, it's 1.9 million. So I can see how much I'm spending at a given level of confidence, what my risk exposure is at a given level of confidence on a periodic basis, which is the bars here. And so I've got P50, P80, P90, and P99 shown here. Then this line is my cumulative spend by a particular point. And so again, we've got the time horizon of the project is the x-axis. This is my periodic cost on the right-hand, left-hand y-axis, and the total, the cumulative on the right-hand side over here. And so if we just kind of go back to my graph here, which is obviously it's a stationary thing across the whole of my project, I'm spending 9.283 million. But actually what the probabilistic cash flow is also showing me is that by the end of my project, this point here, this P90 here, that's the same 9.283 million, but it's also allowing me to break down exactly when I'm exposed to these cost risks across the time horizon of my project. So that's the bars, and then these cumulative lines is showing me how much I'm going to spend on dealing with risks by the end of year 1, year 2, and year 3. So it allows us to kind of break it down a little bit more like that.